Welcome to Testing in the Pub.
Welcome back to Testing in the Pub with Amy Phillips about continuous delivery. This is part 2. If you want to listen to part 1, then check the website.
Does this have an impact on where you test as well?
I think it does, yeah. So, I mean, I think it always comes down to environments. And I think, again, like in all my projects I've been on, test environments has always been a big topic. Like, you never have the right ones, you never have them available when you need them. Are they ever like production? I don't think I've ever had a test environment that really reflects production because it's expensive. And I think that's always a challenge. And this was a challenge. And one of the great things about going to continuous deployment is we now do lots more testing on our dev environments. Which meant they became more realistic because they had to. The developers were like, I can't test. It's not at all like production. So we did it in the cheapest possible way, but we made them a lot more realistic, which is great. And then the test environment, it was, again, the same. There were things that didn't work on the test environment, which we'd always just known about. Like, yeah, don't worry, that feature doesn't work in the test environment. You put it in production, it still doesn't work, and everyone panics. But, you have to get over that. If you want to have automated tests that are reliable, you need it to work on the test environment. So we made some fixes there. But yeah, there are some real benefits if you can test in production. And again, contentious decision. Ultimately because of data, like you need to consider what you do with test data. Like, is it visible to users? There are ways to do it, but basically that's the topic you need to think about is how are you going to test this? What do you do with your test data? And there are lots of places where you can hide test data. I was in a talk that Etsy did, and they have test data in the Etsy store, and it's their gold origami swan. It's awesome. And basically all their selenium tests buy that gold swan. But occasionally a real person buys the gold swan. They have to make one and send it to the person. Yeah. This is a real genuine thing. It's a genuine listing, and they want it. They don't want to have to reveal that they have test data in production. Yep. So it's real data, but it's just they know it's always there. And they've priced it. It's like £6. It's really expensive, or $6. They've priced it so that it looks like, please don't buy the gold swan. But every so often somebody does. So I think you can do testing in production. There are real benefits. You've got load, you've got realistic data. The number of times I've worked on systems where we've done all the testing on test environments, put it onto production, and suddenly notice all the pagination doesn't work because suddenly we have 1,000 records instead of 100. It's really hard to catch those things. So production testing, you need to be careful. You need safeguards. You need to know how you can hide your test data, or are you open? Maybe that's fine. You just mark it up. Test data. Don't use this.
Kind of Amazon, the way Amazon do it.
Yeah. And then, ultimately it comes down, we use feature flippers a lot, and I think lots of people use these. And these are really simple, really straightforward. If statements in the code. So you control when this code executes and when it doesn't. And then we have a UI, which is quite nice actually, because we don't have to release code to control these flippers. Anybody can do it. It's just an admin tool we have. You just change the settings on it, which means we can turn things on, we can turn things off. We can also make them visible for subgroups, so within the office, or maybe logged out users, or 1% of our traffic, which means suddenly we can do A/B testing. We do loads of experiments. Just with exactly the same technology that we needed to be able to test in production. So it's kind of a nice freebie. And that's, adds to the business value again. Suddenly they have something else, which is like, we go, would you like to experiment with this feature? And they can't believe they're like, really? Like, yeah, sure. Would you like 2, maybe 3 versions of this? And it's really great because now it's sort of much more data-driven decisions. We can iterate really quickly.
How about things like security testing, for example?
Yeah, that's really difficult. I think it depends on your team makeup. So for security, we do some of it in-house, but we don't really have an expert in security testing. So for sort of, if we have a big concern and we're like, okay, this is a whole new system, whole new architecture, we will get an external company to test that. And they find that all a bit alarming because we're like, no, we don't code freeze. And they find that really terrifying because they do not like this at all. But, you have to kind of work with them on that. So I think something like that, for us, certainly it exists outside of our pipeline. So again, I think it comes down to separating releasing from launching. So code can be released and out to production. if it's a security risk, we'd have that switched off. And then you can do your security testing, and then you can control when you turn it on. Same with performance, really. Like performance, we have some sort of benchmarking. We've got that built into a Jenkins task. So we have certain tests that run. If they take over a certain amount of time, they fail. And I think Scott Barber talked about this quite a lot at Test Batch. That was quite nice, which you're doing it on the unit tests, and you could do exactly the same thing. You could actually, once you've got enough data, you can actually trend it, and you can see, okay, well, it's trending up, which is a concern, or this release has just doubled the time, which is a very big concern. So you can actually start to have tests like that that fail if you go beyond sort of reasonable areas. But I think there's always going to be a kind of manual aspect to this. Like there's always going to be, you need to have the checks in place. You need to fail something, and the failure needs to mean that a human looks at it and thinks about it and actually goes, okay, why was that slower, or why was that insecure, or what do we do next? So I think you can have aspects of it within your pipeline. I probably wouldn't want to have a pipeline where I go tick security, we're all good, done that one. I would always think there's some additional testing. And I think for most releases there will always be some sort of additional, more exploratory or specialist testing that needs to take place.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about what tools you find help with continuous deployment.
Okay, so I think the key one and the absolute core thing is going to be version control. The only reason this works is because people are checking in code frequently. They need to be checking it in somewhere. Hopefully most teams have that set up already, but that's definitely the first thing to have, is that you put the code into a central repository and people check out from there. You don't have local versions floating around. It's all in one place. And then, that's basically the basics you need. The theory is that you can do it all with just that, but I think most teams have something like Jenkins running, which makes life a whole lot easier. Like you can have all your builds in there. You can use Jenkins to watch for commits of code, and then Jenkins can trigger automated tests and can actually do the deploy. So we have everything running in Jenkins, and then we have our unit tests and we have integration tests, and they're using RSpec generally, and ASpec. It reminds me a lot of Aspic, which is actually really funny because someone pointed out it's actually quite similar. It's like, something suspended in time, which hasn't helped clear up my confusion. Which is quite an awesome tool thing. So again, one to have a look into. And then we've got some Selenium tests which we're using Capybara with. So, basically those are just your test tools of choice. Whatever you want to automate with, you can hook up and work. I think it really doesn't need to be that complicated from a tool side of things. I think culture's the big challenge here. I think it's people. I think actually the most important tool that you can bring is your brain, because you need to think about, I think it's a really interesting way, and I think it's very rare that you sit down and design your release pipeline. I think it's usually quite evolutionary, and you just do stuff and a release comes out of it, and it's only when you hit problems you start to change it and go, don't do that, don't release on Friday afternoon, that was really stressful, let's avoid that. And that's what we did. It got safer and safer and safer to the point where we could barely release. So I think it's actually quite an interesting opportunity to sit down with a complete blank sheet of paper and say, what do we want it to look like? And I think if you get everybody thinking about that, and what does it look like best case, and what does it look like when it's a high risk change, or what does it look like when it all goes wrong, and actually think about how you respond to that, who takes actions, who makes decisions on that. But I think that's really the key aspect of it, is culture.
And that cultural aspect, continuous delivery changes, or has the potential to change how you work as a tester and to change your role. And I think people can be therefore quite defensive against continuous delivery. Is that something you've seen? Being the only tester, there wasn't too much defensiveness on my side. Am I defensive? Yes, I am. No, I'm not.
But no, I certainly think it's difficult, and I think one of the main challenges is it's very developer driven. Now, I think as a tester you're kind of quite conditioned to think that developers are always trying to get away with stuff and cross that line, and you're there to keep them in check. Which I think this one you need to sort of think about things differently. Like, it is developer driven, which means that yes, sure, you need to be involved. You need to be thinking about what that means from a testing point of view. Where will testing fit in? What does it mean from the automation? Like, what's your comfort level, I guess. What must you, and you've got to argue for that. Like, you have to be clear that no, we have to be testing this. This is the area that's high risk. We've broken it 5 times, whatever it is, and make sure that's covered. But I think testers, they've got quite a unique skill set, because you're quite used to working between like multi sort of discipline teams, perhaps more so in developers. Like, you're used to talking to business people and designers, maybe even users. There are some testers who are quite involved in user research, which is really good, and then talking to developers. So I think testers can bring all that together and think about it from a kind of risk point of view, and what is the impact on a user, and actually make sure the pipeline isn't just developers pushing code freely and just having a build day. It's actually making it fast but safe enough. But obviously, the big thing for us was that developers took responsibility. So that means that developers are responsible for quality and with guidance. And this is where testers become important. Like, you need to guide them, you need to educate them. Nobody walks in and knows what quality is. Even testers, we read up on quality all the time. We have people at conferences talking to us about quality. You need to go back and tell the developers the same thing, basically. So it's more down to training, and I spend probably just as much time now testing as I do training. It's definitely like 50-50 in terms of like balance of work. So you need people to understand what testing is. You need them to understand why they can't automate everything, and what that means if they think they can automate everything. And of course, then you've got to get into whole psychology, and there's a whole load of stuff. But hopefully it's interesting, and I think testing's exciting enough at the moment. There's lots of exciting people doing great talks and sharing great resources. You can actually pass that on to non-testers, and they are also excited. It's like, this is a new challenge, the dice game. Have a go. See what you think. And they do. They enjoy. I was at a developer meetup a few weeks ago, and I was telling a developer about testing, and I mentioned the dice game, and he was really disappointed that I hadn't brought my dice with me. I couldn't believe it. He was like, that sounds so much fun. So I was like, that's it. That's the thing. You need to be going out and making it fun and educating everybody.
Yeah, I think that's really key, kind of that going out aspect. The pipeline continuous delivery conference recently, obviously you were one of the organisers.
I was there.
You were definitely there. There's a lot of devs, a lot of people involved in delivery, and then relatively few testers, but there were testers there, and I think it's important to go to stuff like that, have those sorts of discussions, and almost share that understanding.
That's right. And I think the really interesting thing for me was, it was really like there was majority developers, and there were so many testing conversations, and actually developers are talking about testing, and they're forming opinions on what testing is and how testing fits in. Testers really need to be getting out and getting involved in these conversations, and actually having their input into what they think testing is, because it is subtly different.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the more that happens, the more there's a certain argument that says that the testing community can be quite insular in that respect.
I think so.
And I think it's almost that wanting to kind of shut oneself off from the rest of the world and be in one's happy place.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think in a way with testing, like, we're at a stage where I think a lot of testers feel they're learning so much. You don't feel positioned that you can, you're the one who's going out there and telling the world this is what testing is. But I think we should be, certainly within our own team, we should be working with like non-testers and actually exploring testing with them. And I think that's one of the nice things actually now, is that we have at Songkick, we have developers testing, and alongside that I'll be testing, and we don't necessarily tell them, hey, I'm testing this at the same time as you, but you are, and you're doing very different testing. Developers are doing feature testing with sort of guidelines, like, hey, have you checked this? They've got requirements and things that they need to check off. But I can be doing exploratory testing, and actually a bit more sort of destructive testing, I guess. But it's really interesting to see the bugs, we each find, and once you tend to find with developers that, particular developers will miss the same type of bug over and over. So if you can learn that, you can work with them and you can actually sort of do more one-to-one, like pairing with them and things, and actually help them understand that, okay, you can't, you know, this is a weakness, you need to test for this, this is definitely a bug. So you get that kind of whole knowledge share, and hopefully then the next time they build a feature, they remember, okay, I missed this bug, I fixed this bug, and you know, you need to build that into the next build.
Yeah, maybe that is I think a very positive thing about this push towards continuous deployment is it's almost also an enabler for sharing what testing is.
I think so.
And it enables that education without just a tester kind of popping up and going, hey, this is what I do, listen to me because I want to talk about what I do.
That's right, yeah.
It's that whole structure.
It's a tighter collaboration, you know, and it kind of forces people to understand testing a little bit more, which dispels misconceptions.
I think that's right, yeah. I mean, it completely breaks down the whole throwing things over the wall. Like, that's just not going to exist anymore. They don't get away with that. And I mean, I think you find a lot of developers, when you sort of start introducing continuous deployment, and they say, like, can I put this in production? And you say, yeah, sure, does it work? And the number of times they'll go, I'm going to test it again once more. You know, because actually they suddenly realise there's no safety net. That the safety net has been removed, and they really don't want to look stupid, you know. So they do tend to take a lot more care, which I think is fantastic.
Excellent. So, as a final thought, is there any reading material that you can advise for testers to pick up for continuous delivery or deployment?
So the absolute first place to start is the Continuous Delivery book, which Jez Humble and Dave Farley wrote. And that is just the definitive guide. It's quite a chunky bit of kit, but you don't need to read all of it. I think, you know, it's one of those books you can dip in and out as you see relevant. But it's fantastic, and it covers so much of what you need to know, like all the basics, how you go about it. It's quite an old book now. Like they wrote it when continuous delivery was really just starting out. But that's what you need to read. And then, to be honest, get on Twitter, because there are so many interesting conversations going on there. Dave Farley and Jez Humble are both on Twitter. Lots of conversations with them. We've got conferences. I think, to be honest, you're seeing continuous delivery talked about. It was at Eurostar last year. Rob Lambert's got his keynote coming up this year. You know, I think you'll see it come into more tester conferences. I know Steve Smith is doing a talk on release testing. He's a developer doing a talk on release testing at Agile on the Beach, which is going to be really interesting. So I think you're seeing a real crossover here. You know, there are developers who are spending a lot of time thinking about testing, releasing, and that's going to spread out. And I think you need to get more testers thinking about, you know, releasing as well, and automated tests and development, and what it all means to come together. So you'll see it. I think Twitter's the place to go to catch on this. There is a continuous delivery meetup group in London, which is enormous. So again, that's a good place to check out if you want to see who to follow, sort of names on there, or hopefully come along to some of the meetup groups going on.
Cool, and some good blogs. I know you've got a good blog.
I've got a blog. I sometimes write about continuous delivery, amongst other things, general testing and things like that. But we should maybe add some stuff to maybe add a comment to the podcast page with some of the other URLs, because there's a load of stuff. There are so many people. I think it's just such an interesting topic at the moment. There is a lot of material out there.
Yeah, and of course, people can follow you on Twitter as well. So
they can. I am on Twitter. I have my Twitter handle as It Just Broke. So yeah, you can follow along, which I was actually famous for always saying before Twitter came along. Everyone would just be constantly like, "What did you do to it? It was working." Like, no, it just broke. I didn't do anything. It just broke.
Excellent. Well, thanks very, very much, Amy. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been good fun.